It's 12 o'clock and our first In Conversation with webinar has just kicked off. Thanks so much for participating today and being here. It is very exciting and I'm very, very pleased to introduce or to have Nicola and Jonathan from Insight with us today. But before I start the session formally, please feel free to add any questions, comments, any expectations that you have of today's session in the chat. And we are going to try and deal with as many of these chats as possible. On the screen today, you'll see a Mentimeter. If you have your phone, you can open it with the QR code, or you can go to the website and pin in that code. There's a couple of questions. We are just kind of doing a quick check on some of the, it's always interesting to do a bit of a check on how people feel about things. So after so many requests to restart our Directors' Hours sessions, we are launching our In Conversation sessions. At FluidRock, it is our vision to live in a society fueled by ethical and well-governed corporate citizens. And so to further our vision, we have decided to have these monthly webinars again. We are going to be inviting local, African and international partners and subject matter experts and a range of topics to provide all of us with real value and insight and food for thought. So please diarize the FluidRock In Conversation with sessions 12 o'clock every first Thursday of the month. I'm your host for today. I am Ronelle. I'm the CEO of FluidRock Governance Group. We are the leading independent corporate governance firm. And today I'm going to say we are the G in ESG. I am personally passionate about growing food gardens, people, businesses, and kids. And my background is in law. I'm a lawyer, but please don't judge me. And I'm a director. I used to be a company secretary at listed level. And today I'm very blessed to be able to work with the team at FluidRock. We're about 80 people that are striving to have a positive impact. Today, like I've said, I'm very excited, humbled, and pleased to be able to introduce our partners of today and ESG subject matter experts, Nicola Robbins and Jonathon Hanks. You guys are welcome to come on camera. And they are directors of Insight. They have the most exciting and interesting bios. Jonathan, he's actually in Lisbon today. So he's phoning in from that side of the world. He has a lot of experience, many years experience in sustainability, advisory and advocacy. He is he's Mr. ESG when it comes to disclosures, if you ask me. He works with a lot of global experience with CDP, GRI, IRC, ISO, UNGC. He can explain all those acronyms to us just now. And he's worked really across the world. He's a visiting lecturer at various business schools at MBA level. He's a keen kite surfer, skier, and trail runner. And one of his most recent accomplishments is he actually drafted the JSE disclosure guidance on sustainability and climate change that has maybe hit your inbox. And if you wanted, you can just drop a chat because we can actually send that out after the session with the slides today. You don't have to take notes. Then Nicola also has got such a fascinating bio, her experience, her I didn't even know you can study these things. She has a qualification in shared value. She also has over 25 years of working internationally on ESG. She has a qualification in organizational constellations. I would love to hear more about that. Traditional ritual design, systemic practice, which I think she got from Botswana, and a master's in industrial ecology from Yale University in the US. She's also a visiting lecturer at various business schools, including UCT and Trinity Business College in Dublin. She is a free diver and she lives a short walk from the great edge of the great African sea forest. I think I live a short walk away from the great African concrete jungle. I'm going to introduce myself like that from now on. So Jonathan and Nicola, thanks so much. I'm going to hand over to you just now. Today's format is Jonathan and Nicola is going to set the context for us. They're going to share some information with us, and then we are going to open the channels and we're going to have a Q&A. So please put your questions there. Anything that you want to ask. There's no such thing as a stupid question. ESG is one of those things where everyone talks about it, and I feel like I'm always the one in the room that doesn't understand it properly. So this is today a very important topic for us. It's all about what is the competitive advantage of doing ESG or not? You know, what is the value of it? How are people seeing it? We can't get left behind. So Jonathan, if I can please hand over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ronelle, and good afternoon, colleagues. We've got an hour together. I'm going to start off by sharing some thoughts on really understanding what sustainability and ESG is, because in my experience, there's huge levels of misunderstanding. So I'll share some thoughts, then we'll stop and take some discussion. And then Nikki is going to unpack in a bit more detail the how to do it, how to make sure we integrate these issues more strategically inside the organization. So Nikki and I have worked with companies, a whole range of companies for about 25 years in dealing with ESG issues. And in my experience, there's a lot of misunderstanding around this and kind of frustrating misunderstanding. So what I want to do up front is really make sure we address some of the common misperceptions. If you Google sustainability, and that's what I did last night, I Googled sustainability and I got this kind of set of images. And this speaks to one of the big misconceptions I think that's out there, is that sustainability is about being good and about being green. It's about caring and holding the trees in your hand and I'm going to be good and I'm going to save the environment. I've been introduced, and some of our colleagues who are sustainability managers have been introduced as the tree hugger or the bunny hugger. And I really think that doesn't help to get integration in the organization if that's how this issue is seen. The other challenge is most sustainability managers or ESG managers are typically tasked to do compliance elements, to fill in the form of the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, to write a sustainability report, to fill in the hundreds of questionnaires that you're getting from MSCI or Sustainalytics. And that's a kind of a compliance job that doesn't shift how the company addresses its core business. So we need to address this misperception. I'm going to say that there's 4 key elements which I think are causing confusion. Firstly, it's not about being good or green. Certainly, we want to make sure that you're ethical. We want to make sure you cover environmental issues, but it's not appropriate to frame it in that mindset. It's not simply about managing risk and ensuring compliance with a whole lot of different checklists. It shouldn't be seen as an inevitable cost of being responsible. And it's not mainly about climate change. And I've seen across almost all of our clients that 4 of these different 4 misconceptions are incredibly prevalent. The Economist put out its magazine about a week ago. The cover article was about ESG, and they were kind of implying or making the case that it's largely about climate change. The request that has come out from asset managers in this country that you need to do the fill in the form of the TCFD, I think also perpetuates that misunderstanding. So it's not these things. What is it? And I'm going to say it's 4 different issues, and I'm going to unpack each of these with a slide on each. The first one is, it's about really rethinking value. It's about helping companies have a more informed understanding about the broader context they're operating in, to help them make better decision-making and to ensure better allocation of financial capital. So it's really to understand that these issues are strategic and have an impact on the organization. It's rethinking how we do our accounts, in effect. Secondly, it is about protecting value. Part of that is absolutely clear, but it's about understanding the scale of the risk, which I don't think is appreciated by many organizations, and the time factor, how rapid some of these risks are coming. And I'm going to share one example on this. The third one is, and this we find many companies really hard to kind of make this jump. It's also about creating value. There's a lot of money to be made in addressing some of the ESG challenges that we face. And some companies find it hard to believe, well, if I'm making money out of this, then I can't be doing good, because there seems to be this trade-off. And we really need to hit this one on the head. There is money to be made in addressing the environmental and social challenges. We're in a time of great disruption, and the smart companies are getting this and are driving innovation at scale to address some challenges. And fourthly, and importantly, it's about enabling value. It's about using your influence as organizations to drive broader change through collaboration across the value chain, but also to lobby for change of voters or of change in government. So let me take each of these 4 elements in turn. The first one is about rethinking value. So let's take a very simple tool, which we've used for many, many years and has gained popularity with the integrated reporting, the idea of the capitals. But let's just make sure it's properly understood. So here we have the planet where we do our business. It's a closed system. Nothing comes in other than solar energy. That's the only income that we have. is solar energy comes in. So we're operating in a closed, finite system. Within that, you have human society. And this has grown dramatically in the last 200 years. If you look down here, we reached our first billion in the early 1800s. First billion of all of human history, and the millions of years the planet's been here. We reached our first billion. We reached our next billion 50 years later, 100 years later, in the early 1920s. Then our next billion 30 years later, and our next billion 15 years later, exponential growth. So we're seeing this huge and dramatic increase in human society within this finite system. Within that, and as a subset of that, you have the economy. And I think it's useful to see the context here. Before 1750, before the Industrial Revolution, it took around 6,000 years for economies to double in size. What we're seeing now, since 1750, is the average is around 50 years for the economy to double in size. But let's take these countries: Britain, Germany, Japan, China, and India. And you're seeing again exponential. So you're seeing within this finite system, huge growth in society, huge growth in the economy. Can we sustain that? Well, I think we're going to see massive disruption if we're going to see how we maintain the economy and society operating within this context. So how do we convince this, make this clear to business? We use the language of business. As any smart business person knows, it's not good business to undermine your capital asset. So we speak the language of capitals to business. We want our economies to flourish, our societies to flourish. We need to recognize that they're all interdependent. We're not going to get a successful economy without social justice. You're not going to save the rhino without social justice, but you're not going to get social justice without a flourishing environment and some degree of economic development. So these things are interdependent. So speaking the language of business and really making this case and understanding rethinking value. The problem that we have is those of you that are chartered accountants, like Ronelle, I'm a lawyer, but there are probably some accountants in the room. Those of you that are chartered accountants, you have several hundred years of accounting history on how to track companies' performance. And that's done by looking at what we call financial capital. But companies, if they flourish, depend ultimately on social capital. That's levels of trust between institutions, between people, between organizations. Levels of trust globally are low, hence the rise of populism and nationalism, Donald Trump and Brexit and the EFF and frustrations that we see. Social capital is low. We have human capital, that's our health and so on, and we have natural capital. The problem we have is we aren't assigning value to those capital assets that we depend on. So in effect, business is failing its own accounting principles by not recognizing the importance of these issues. This is not sustainable. So what we're doing with understanding sustainable development is understanding more effectively how we create value, understanding the interdependencies with these issues, and understanding that most of business is making decisions based on a flawed understanding and wrong assumptions about how they're tracking value. So that's the first point, rethinking value. I'll take the next three fairly quickly. The second one is around protecting value. And I think what's important here is to understand that ESG issues are increasingly having a profound impact on risk, the scale of which I don't think is sufficiently appreciated. And these are becoming more rapid in time. And so Nikki perhaps later can share some examples from KwaZulu-Natal. But let's take the issue around climate as one example. We could do the same with inequality, but on climate. Here we have if we're going to meet the targets that have been set out globally on climate issues, then 84% of the remaining fossil fuel would need to remain in the ground. So that would cost 900 billion worth of stranded energy assets. A third of the market capitalization of the large organizations becomes stranded. That's a fundamental rethink in terms of those business models. And we could take other examples of where there is this profound issue. Smart companies get this. Smart companies are repositioning. So this is Dong Energy, kind of unusual name, but it was Danish oil and natural gas. They saw the writing on the wall, have shifted and have become Ørsted, completely moved out of that business model of oil and natural gas and instead become a large renewable energy company. So rethinking, they don't want to become the next Kodak, they're rethinking the understanding the scale of the risk. But let's still talk about creating value. And of course, we can take the richest man in the world, a smart individual who understood that the world is going to shift. there's no way we can meet the needs of 9 billion people if we're all using an internal combustion engine. But as a smart entrepreneur, he saw that there was huge business opportunities in repositioning how we do business. And he's done well in doing that. We can take another one. It's clear that there's no way we can have 9 billion people eating meat in traditionally grown or traditionally harvested manufactured meat. Smart business people have seen that. So when Beyond Meat listed in 2019, it had the best IPO of the year, and we saw investors flocking in. This was an organization which is addressing 4 big ESG challenges associated with meat and doing so profitably. So we need to recognize there is real strategic benefit in responding to ESG issues. And let me take the fourth and final point, and then we can stop and take some questions. And this is around leading broader system change. The smart business leaders get that there's some deep systemic challenges, that it's complex, that it's challenging. But they're looking to drive change. So not just make more money by doing good or manage risk, but actually make a better enabling environment. So 2 examples, Unilever, living wage. So they've got this commitment, which I think is hugely profound, that everyone who directly provides goods and services to Unilever by 2030 will earn at least a living wage. Now, a living wage is not the same as a minimum wage. In many countries, it's quite a bit more, but it's a living wage. So those that grow healthy product can afford to buy that healthy product, not the case at the moment. Let's take a final example is Patagonia. We're all familiar with this. It's an environmental activist organization. This is one which I thought was quite interesting. It's inside the label of some of the, so it was a subversive bit of activism, but this was their response to the election of Donald Trump. And what we're seeing here is companies increasingly engaging in driving broader system change because they recognize the need to do so. So what I thought to do is highlight what ESG is not, highlight what it is. Perhaps I can stop here and see, are there questions? Does this resonate with how you're seeing it in your organizations? And if I look here at how you responded, we're seeing, and Nikki, you might want to chip in with some reflections on what you're seeing here. Not too surprised that further to the right on the first one. So most of you see this as a compliance effort to meet stakeholder expectations. Certainly some as a marketing effort. And very interesting, the massive disconnect on strategic effort to drive differentiation and innovation. We're getting some more responses. So yes, should I see some questions coming in. Nikki, do you want to add anything, or Ronelle get some questions going?
Sure, I'll just add on that graph. Thanks, John. What I think interesting here is if you look at the third one as a strategic effort to drive innovation and differentiation, you're seeing in effect 2 peaks. Where a big, a fairly large number of people responding right on the extreme left, and then a sort of a fairly good spread after that. The other ones are pretty consistent in terms of how people are seeing it. So there are some people who certainly understand the strategic effort, and I think if we'd run this perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, we would have seen even less people recognizing the importance of the strategic angle on sustainability and ESG.
Thanks, Nikki.
Interesting stuff. Jonathan, interesting stuff. Yes, let's take Mimi's question. How about discovery and their shared value model? Can a sick society care for its environment? Any comments?
Nikki, go for it. You've done work with them.
Thanks, Mimi. It's a great question, and I'm going to take them separately in a way, which is, can a sick society care for its environment? Well, part of the reason society does get sick is due to its environment, but I understand what you're saying. In other words, in a society where social issues and issues of exclusion, issues of marginalization are an issue, shouldn't be rather worrying about people getting health insurance who currently can't afford it and access to good hospitals, etc., than worrying about environment. So yes, absolutely, that is a context issue that needs to recognize what is the priority in South Africa. But Discovery, if you look at their shared value insurance model, has really responded exactly to that. If you look at where they're putting their energy, they are focusing on an issue of health. So the Discovery model addresses the issue of health, except it does so largely for more sort of upper income people. So a lot of people cannot afford the discovery model. They have tried to create a sort of a lower cost option, but it is not as scaled or necessarily scalable as what discovery, as the discovery vitality model for other people. So technically, the discovery shared value model is absolutely doing the right thing. It's recognizing that it has leverage in relation to getting people to change their behavior to improve their health. They've also managed to tie that back, and this is what you're speaking to, their shared value model. They're tying that back into their business, and it is absolutely the basis of what Discovery's business model is about. In addition, they are now starting to ask questions because of the linkages that Jonathon drew. They're starting to ask questions about, well, you know, what is healthy people, or getting a bit healthier because you're eating good fruits and vegetables and going to the gym, if climate change is locking us down in our houses for 3 or 4 hours a day because it's too darn hot to go outside. So Discovery has recognized, even though they don't have much leverage comparatively in relation to climate and reducing energy, they've decided to start to use their business model to find that leverage. So if you go back and look at where one of their angles of energies is allocated, it is specifically looking at their client base, because that's their scale play. They've got at least 7 million people and growing in their clients. And they are now scaling that in relation to the possibility of low carbon options for energy, looking at behavior incentives to get people to use their cars less. They have endless internal discussions, I can attest to that, about whether they should be supporting flights through their Kalula discount. I'm not even sure if all those things happen anymore, but they are certainly grappling with them. So maybe my answer to your question is really, it's a great shared value model in terms of understanding leverage and strategy from Discovery's point of view, and they're a global leader in that respect. And it's not an option either or, right? They have to also understand what the opportunities they have to address environmental challenges as well. They've got to do both. What is useful for Discovery is, as Jonathon's put up the slide, if you'll see on the strategic side, they've used vitality as an underlying chassis to get scale in their delivery of societal value. And they are now saying, well, how can we use that chassis, that behavior change mechanism, to get people to change their behavior in relation to energy choices, etc. So it's bridging that divide and getting over the either or. We've got quite an addiction to either ors, right, in our society. So it's can we say both and?
Can I add briefly to Mimi's question, and just to really highlight what Nikki has said? Why this is such a good example of shared value is because it's driven that behavior change and driven profit at the same time. And I think the confusion that we've seen in a lot of companies is the misunderstanding around shared value. And I think it's really useful to get to the article where this concept came. It came from Michael Porter and Mark Kramer. And Michael Porter's great on competitive differentiation. And it's really important to get that understanding that shared value is about driving social and environmental value at the same time as driving profitable value. And that's why Discovery is such an excellent example of that. But unfortunately, it's an area where there is some misunderstanding. Ronelle.
No, I was just going to chirp in with tongue-in-cheek comment to say, you know, this vitality program has actually caused a few divorces because people are not keeping up their points. So if you're, I don't know the rating scale, but if you're not a platinum and your buddy's I don't know, a bronze level, then they go like, I don't want to be with you anymore. So tongue-in-cheek, there's a lot of peer pressure then to actually provide value in that aspect. But over back to you, Jonathan.
So I'm not sure if any further questions. And perhaps Nikki, if you wanted to build on this distinction that you've got here between the strategic element and the governance aspect, and some of the experience about how we take this forward in practice, this ESG concept, assuming there's an agreed understanding of what it is, building on what I said earlier, how do we take this forward in practice? Some thoughts you want to share there?
Sure. I mean, if we're looking at taking a more strategic view on sustainability and ESG, and I think this is really important given the scale of the disruption we're facing, given the extent of the risks that we're facing. I mean, Jonathon mentioned some of the risks. I mean, just looking back on the civil unrest last year, 2021, in July. I mean, you had 50 billion wiped off out of our economy, in effect, in those areas, and this was just from a few weeks. We had nearly 2,000 stores damaged in various ways. So you had retailers, you had real estate investment trusts kind of reeling from their impact. I mean, it's logical that it's happening, right? And we can kind of imagine this is going to happen because this is the inevitable consequence of a society as unequal as ours, but very difficult to prepare for these things. Similar with earlier this year, if you look in April of the flood damage, and this is Toyota's Durban plant. I mean, on the one hand, from a social perspective, I hear that the social media is kind of awash in people preparing to buy a flood damaged car, and they're just hoping it's going to be a lot cheaper than they can buy a car for currently. But Toyota haven't released the implications in terms of the financial cost of this, but apparently an unquoted exec is, this is about 2.8 billion worth. It was reported in MoneyWeb as possible implication of this flood damage in their plant. You can say on one hand, oh, but you know, these things, how can we anticipate them? Well, we can't absolutely anticipate when they're going to happen, for sure. This is a very unpredictable and very complex space. But what we can say for sure, because climate scientists have been saying this for at least 30 or 40 years, is that these events are going to increase. We're going to see more and more of them. There's going to be increasing frequency and increasing severity. And so when we're starting to look at strategy and thinking about sustainability and ESG in a strategic way, it's about realizing what these risks are, working out which ones are material to us, and then working out where we can turn them into opportunities. We can't turn them all into opportunities for scaled positive impact. But like discovery, if we can work out through a deep understanding of our assets, our competencies, our partnerships, our tech, how can we use those to respond to an inevitable risk, an increasingly and possibly disruptive risk, and turn that into an opportunity for disruption ourselves. And so just the message there is the left-hand side of that image. We need to take the strategic vision and apply it to this ESG playing field, this series of highly interconnected risks and opportunities, and use that view to enhance the business model. Where can we find what we call profit-led ESG impact? Not because we are necessarily rampant capitalists desperate for profit. We want a profit-led initiative or set of initiatives because the profit element drives scale. And if we don't start to scale our response to these issues, we are not going to address them sufficiently in the time that we have. We're really going to take a hit. On the other side, we can't just focus on how to find scaled profit-led impact. We also need to recognize that society has understood and believes certain things are important. We need to have well-run, as Ronelle said, ethical and focused businesses. And we also have to integrate ESG issues, risks, and opportunities, and the oversight thereof into our governance practices in organizations. And I'm taking a fairly conservative view of what governance is. It's probably from Ronelle's point of view, it's bigger than that. But we've got to do both of these things at the same time. And these two distinct areas of integration can sometimes be quite challenging for organizations. Quite often the organization is good on the one side and not as good on the other, or vice versa. And certainly if you're doing your sustainability work right, if you're approaching it with a sufficiently informed lens, you're going to develop a capability within your organization of doing both of these things better, which again, looking at the disruption coming down the line, is an incredibly important thing to do. Yeah, John, maybe any other thought there?
So we only got another question from Mimi, but I think what might be useful is just to share one of the tools that we use with our companies, or perhaps two of the tools that we use with our companies, to show how we put this in practice. And perhaps we can start with this one. Since I have the screen, I can pass it across to you, Nikki. But just to perhaps briefly explain this, because it builds on the elements we raised earlier, the different approaches to understanding ESG, protecting, creating, and enabling value. And I think it's useful, Nikki, while you speak to this, for the companies in the room and for those of you that work for different companies, to kind of consider, where would you sit? How do you see your company in terms of these different approaches? Nikki, would that be useful, I think, to speak through this and then perhaps the quadrant, because it really helps to land some of this thinking in practice.
Sure, happy to do that, John. And maybe let's come back to your question. I think it's a great one. So this is one of the tools we use, and really the underlying aim of this tool is to encourage people within organizations to stop thinking about sustainability as some kind of project that they've got to do, and to start thinking about it in terms of the capabilities that they have at their interface with environmental, social, and governance challenges. That interface is very dynamic, it's very complex, highly interconnected, but as they develop their capabilities, they are more able to do intelligent integration into the business model. So as John said, we would protect value in the first instance. Until you're protecting your value, you don't want to go out and try and create more necessarily. So in this space, we would typically focus on protecting value, although, I mean, that said, not necessarily, because from an ESG point of view, coming back to Mimi, coming back to your example of Discovery, they jumped in at scale profit-led ESG innovation through the business ecosystem, through Surf the Waves under B. So they jumped into creating value, and they almost, after about 10 years of growing their business extremely fast, realized they had to go back and really up their capability with respect to clients, compliance, and risk. So this is not a very linear step-by-step maturity framework. It is, however, most common that organizations will start with protecting value. So we talk about organizations staying afloat at this ESG interface, and a lot of initiatives are about reducing cost, lowering their ESG risk, making sure that they're effectively keeping their stakeholders and increasingly their investors happy in relation to their ability to protect their value in face of these risks. It's not the last step, however, because there's a huge set of opportunities, and already Jonathon has spoken to this already. As you deepen and extend and grow your capabilities at this interface, you may then go into what we call test the waves. And this is a very creative space. It's a space where you've got to start sort of letting go of all the kind of crossing the T's and dotting the I's and explore a little bit. So organizations can culturally sometimes find this quite a challenging space. But here you're looking at exploring what profit-led opportunities are open to us. So if we know these are the risks and this is what's material to us as an organization, what could be out there for us to scale? What you'll find is over time, you don't have enough energy, effort, resources, and capital to invest into all of them. So you're going to work out which ones are the most important from a scale point of view. You have to focus your energy and your investment in the space because, again, going back to the 6 capitals model, you can never throw money at these problems. They are far bigger than you are. What you've got to do is work out the allocation, where you can make a difference. You've got to find the leverage to know for us as a Discovery, or for us as a Distel, or for us as a Unilever, this is where we can make a significant difference and scale it through the ecosystem. So, for example, Unilever, it may be on living wage. For Discovery, it might be behavior change. For Distel, it might be, I don't know, inclusive value chain, whatever. There's going to be a particular area of scaled initiative. And once you've done that integration, and now we're sitting at Surf the Waves, once you've done that integration and it is effectively informing your core business strategy, you have grown your resilience, and you will then have a little bit of space, learning, capability, openness to explore what does it mean to advocate and collaborate. Now, this is beyond the profit-led. It is into collaboration to address systemic risks, because we also have to work together. And this is a spectrum of capabilities. that organizations will develop if they approach sustainability and ESG through this more integral or integrated way. And just have a think where your capabilities are. Where are you excelling? Where are you perhaps less advanced in response to your potential, in relation to potential?
And in our experience, we find most of our clients are probably where you see that orange marker. Most of our clients are kind of beginning to test the waves. Perhaps why they become our clients. They're asking us questions how to do this. But the bell curve you'd have of most companies they're kind of A to B. They're in that area there. And there's still very many that just see this as a compliance driver, that are there to protect value. And there's those outliers that are really driving advocacy and collaboration, but we're seeing increasing engagement of companies in doing this because they're beginning to see the urgency of some of the social and environmental challenges that we face. I don't know, Ronelle, if you've seen that with your clients, where you'd see them being positioned and whether this kind of resonates as an approach to how companies are approaching ESG issues more broadly. I see yeah, go for it, Ronelle.
No, so Jonathan, just to link onto that, I was thinking as you were speaking, I was saying, well, Unilever is obviously creating waves, and what's happening with the many clients are that the institutional shareholders are actually driving this, and certain, I would say, kind of activist shareholders are driving this. So it's actually coming from a different place where I thought it would come, and it is having. It is forcing conversations. Conversations are forcing committees at board level. Committees are forcing a change. But I do not see yet where strategy is created with ESG in mind or as the push factor from that. That's our experience. So I'm very much in alignment with what you're saying. So you're welcome to take the question, Jonathan.
Nick, if you had a chance to read Rudy's long question, do you want to respond to it?
Yeah, I can jump in on Rudy's question. Thanks, Rudy. Yes and no. So yes, you're quite right. You're going to find typically that large organizations have got the breadth of capability to work with all of these areas more quickly than a small company. But what we're seeing now is a number of startups jumping into the space, and perhaps this is millennials. I don't think it's only millennials, but it's organizations that are small and can see the opportunity, and they start from the opportunity. So they start quite far down in relation to creating value in this very disruptive, highly significant ESG pressured space. They come in and they're offering new ways of doing finance that support inclusion. They're offering new ways of scaling your energy or access to energy. They're offering new products that make real sense to people who are marginalized in society and unable to access things. And they're completely different. And they do need to go into a process of learning and maturing to be able to extend their capabilities across all of these three areas. But yes, there's a lot to be learned, I think, from small companies who are understanding the ability to turn risk into opportunity before some of the old kind of slow moving old companies that we might expect to do a little bit better. I don't know if you see that, John.
Yeah, and I mean, so some of the big, we work with some of the cell phone companies, and for them to go out and really do some of these shared value opportunities, they find it harder as the big mother ship, the Vodacom or the MTN, to go out and kind of test the water and fail. So they invest in these smaller startups that go out and do some of this ESG initiatives, and they go out and, there's a whole range of them doing really, really exciting stuff, which is addressing social and environmental challenges at profit. But they find it easier because, and I guess an irony here, there's less of some of the detailed governance requirements. It's easier for these small agile organizations. And I think let's take Beyond Meat. That started off, as many of these guys did, as fairly small organizations. The challenge is whether some of the big companies have the capacity to change at scale. And one of the issues here is coming back to your point, Ronelle, about investors. investors, yes, are getting ESG issues and sustainability issues. The problem with many investors, not all, but many, is their timeframes are quite short. They're held to account on shorter timeframes as institutional investors. And so they aren't always driving the change at scale that's required. So one of the first things that Paul Polman did when he came in at Unilever is he said, well, we're a long-term company. We've been around here for 100 years. We're not going to issue quarterly returns in the United States. And he said to his investors, if you're not a long-term investor, well, then go and find some other company to invest in. So some of the constraints we've got with many of our clients is, well, yes, I can see these opportunities in B and C, but the payback period is beyond what we can afford because we've got to deliver shareholder value over this short period of time. And so one of the big kind of debates in the ESG sustainability field, and it gets a bit academic perhaps, but it's very passionate, is ESG is often seen as about managing risk for businesses or protecting enterprise value, whereas sustainability is looking at some of the broader issues, the broader impacts, driving the system change. And some of those don't pay within typical investor time horizons. So I think that's one of the real big constraints that we face is, will listed companies, enough of them, drive the pace and scale of change that we need, or will it be the disruptive startups that come and do that?
Maybe, John, to add, and Shirley's raised the point following on from Rudy, which is that a lot of organizations are overwhelmed by the sort of the nature of the disclosure pressures. And one of the challenges I think that we need to address as practitioners and perhaps people supporting organizations such as that, we are potentially small or medium-sized companies, is not to drop their potential sort of shared value thinking, their opportunities to scale their impact because they're trying to tick boxes. To say that those boxes are never going to be sufficiently nuanced to pick up the differences in how organizations are going to create social impact at scale. Those boxes are standardized. They're not necessarily about strategy. They're absolutely standard so that we can begin to look across companies and work out, you know, if they all tick the same box, which one would be doing it better than another one? But that does not talk to how they do it. And quite often, I would work with companies who don't realize that their core business model is delivering more social or environmental impact than all their box ticking. They've kind of got it the wrong way around. And it's just helping them over that. And at that point, once they realize that and they can start quantifying and finding a way to tangibly communicate the societal value that they deliver through their business model, they get all inspired again and kind of carry on box ticking, because that's also important to enable their investors to understand their valuations.
But sorry, go for it.
Sorry, Jonathan, to interrupt, but maybe that also links into Mimi's question about why is the JSE reluctant to enforce ESG reporting. It's because we're nowhere near creating the waves. We're staying afloat. We're staying afloat, and we are surviving because we're overwhelmed.
Yeah, they're probably more kind of I'm trying to find the right word. I mean, the JSE, they're also in a tricky space because they're a listed company themselves, and so part of their business model is to get more companies listed. And I think the concern is if they're seen to be requiring more box ticking, becomes seen as a box ticking exercise, there's going to be more persuasion of companies not to get listed. But I think that issue becomes as a kind of the real politic of some of these elements, which I think is unfortunate. And I just want to build on the point Nikki made earlier. And I guess I don't want to belabor it, but I think it's really useful for it to sink. Again, working with one of the cell phone companies, they were doing some really interesting, innovative work, which was solving social problems and driving money. So things like M-Pesa, mobile money. But when one of the organizations, one of the rising stars in the organization from one of the different countries, was told, well, this issue that you're doing is a sustainability issue. He said, no, it's not a sustainability issue, because sustainability or ESG was so tarnished with this box ticking idea. And also he couldn't see that making money is different to doing good. It's such a fundamental shift that needs to happen, that there are really innovative business opportunities. And I think the sustainability people here we're partly to blame. And many of our colleagues who are sustainability practitioners, because they're tasked with ticking boxes, they become good at ticking boxes, and they're not going to be the guys that drive the system change. And so they've got to be good at reframing the narrative and finding helpful allies inside the organization, those that have the ear of the executive, that drive strategy, and use them to shift that. One of the things I think which Nike did, which is quite good, is they actually dropped the term corporate responsibility, because they thought if you're talking about being responsible, it doesn't turn on the executive, and it's all about innovation. So reframing this whole ESG narrative is really important, but I think it's got tarnished with a bunch of compliance brushes, and the way the investors are getting involved in it hasn't necessarily helped. Nikki,
I'm not saying compliance isn't important, right? It's important. We've just got to keep these separate in our mind and realize that they require different lenses and different energies and different functions within our organization to get engaged. That's why it doesn't make sense to have a sustainability team doing the sustainability stuff, because it is a group-wide or organization-wide effort. And to do that well, what you need to have clarity across the organization on which direction is forward, how far and fast we want to go. We need a framework to inform decisions and decision-making and action at this interface with ESG issues. And so it cannot be the preserve of one particular team, or in some terrible cases, one poor person is carrying it all on his or often her shoulders.
Do you want to share some thoughts, perhaps on the wireframe issue? Might be useful here. Nicola, do you think that'd be a useful element to kind of help? You know, I see Mimi facing certain challenges within the organization. And reframing the narrative. Maybe it would be useful here to speak briefly to this, Nikki. I think we have some time. Want to do that?
Sure. If there aren't any other questions, just the way we approach this decision framework is firstly recognizing it as an organization-wide need for direction. And it could be the executive team, the CEO, making a decision around an acquisition. And it could be a supervisor working on which chemical to use to clean the floor. These are both important decisions from a sustainability point of view. The wrong chemical used in the wrong way can result in a liability emerging in that space. Similarly, an acquisition of an organization that from a sustainability point of view is in the wrong direction is going to become a very expensive mistake. Now, the challenge is, how do we have a framework that makes sense of all these, as I said, many complex, interconnected, important issues, because we know that there are a lot of them. And so for us, very much the strategy process is a process of sense making sense of all of these issues from the perspective of your organization, its capabilities, its value chain, its business model. And so that has to be the starting point, rather than what boxes I want to tick. You're going to tick the boxes as well, but that cannot inform your decision making, because you are then inevitably going to miss out on the opportunities for scaled impact, because remember, those are not going to be standardized. They're going to depend on your business model. So here's just a wireframe that we use. And if there is a purpose statement, why the organization exists, this is quite an in thing at the moment, and I think it's a really good thing. It gives you an overall sense of direction. And very often it has a societal element, and that's kind of the difference almost between the old vision and mission, right? And how people are reframing themselves as we exist to do something more than deliver profit or excellence. The second line, we call this the strategic line. It is where you as an organization have the ability to make a strategic impact through your business model and through your innovation, your effort, etc. And this is measurable. Your strategic areas will typically have at least 2 lines of data of disclosure. The one would be, what is the financial benefit in terms of your revenues or your costs going down, your revenues up, your costs down, or in a longer term, enhancing the resilience of your system. Each of these goals, goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, each of these goal areas would need to be linked in to a scalable, profit-led ESG opportunity area. And working out what those are, there are lots of tools to help you do that. We can't go into that, but you certainly can hop over to our blog and you'll find some things there. The point about the strategic opportunities and these three big goals: innovative. This is not business as usual. All right, just because you sell products and people want a product, well, that's business as usual. Tell me what's different about that product in terms of today's societal challenges. What's different in terms of inclusion? What's different in terms of access? What's different in terms of carbon and low carbon future? Differentiated, tangible. So measurement is extremely important. That strategic effort or energy and then set of goals is brought about through very clever use of your enablers. And your enablers could be excellent governance, good tech platforms, a really deep innovation culture, particular partnerships. So really, again, understanding that we can't put effort and scale everything, but we do need to find the right areas to scale for us. And at the bottom, underpinning it all, is the energy and the power of your internal networks. So if we begin to understand the complexity and the interrelatedness of environmental and social and governance issues and how they're going to get worse, actually over the next 10, 20, 30, perhaps 50 years, until we've really solved these fundamental problems that Jonathon has spoken to, what we want more than anything is early detection of environmental or social risks and environmental and social opportunities, right? Because they're in effect the same thing, depending on how we respond. What we need for early detection is at least diverse perspectives. We have to see through different eyes. Otherwise, we will not see them because we will be in our own little pattern and trained way of thinking. And if we all think like, excuse the generalization, but sort of white, middle-aged men, we are not going to see the opportunity from a sufficiently cognitively diverse point of view. That is why diversity is important. Safety and wellness. If we are not well, if we're not able to think clearly because we are either hungry or we are depressed, we are not going to see the opportunity either. Learning and sharing. That should be learning and sharing. Sorry, not learning and learning. Learning and sharing, absolutely critical again, because we need to have multiple perspectives on the issue. And so this is just really showing, again, from a strategic point of view, how the way you inform your decisions and decision-making can be carefully structured into a framework that guides an organization. It is the organization's framework, not the sustainability team's framework. But if you don't have something like this that helps you on every decision and every action you take, life gets difficult because nobody agrees on the direction because it's too complex.
I think it's Nicola, to build on the point that Shirley makes. The real starting point in any of the discussion that we have with organizations is understanding their current business model. That's where you want to start, is really interrogate how the organization currently creates value. And you have a facilitated discussion with the executive in the room where you look at their business model, you look at their interaction with the capital stocks, you look at the risks and opportunities that are out there, the nature of the challenges that are coming down the track, and I've seen a question on that. And then we've found by having that discussion with executives in the room, they kind of sit back and there's a lively discussion about, well, are we actually building or undermining social or human capital? It's a useful discussion. And you frame it against their business model. And then they see, gosh, this stuff is actually strategic. It's not this box ticking stuff. And having that discussion is hugely important. You have to get over the barrier of how this issue is seen and reframe it. But once you've done that, and once you've had this discussion informed by the business model, informed by the understanding of the context, then you start getting really rich set of ideas around opportunities. And then, Nicola, perhaps you can speak very briefly to I see we're getting short of time here, but briefly to the idea of inspiring organizations to think through shared value opportunities in a moment or two. Would that be useful?
Yeah, I think there's also other questions. Ronelle, where do you go?
Yes, I think Andre's question is very interesting. What do you think are the biggest trends facing the world over the next 10 years, shifting ESG into a brave new world? And if you just look back over the past 2 years, that has fast-tracked us. I mean, now people are really taking ESG seriously, and it took us a pandemic, a riot, a flood, etc., to get there. So anything else that you see on the horizon?
I'll kick off and then Nicola can chip in. I think what's going to be interesting is how the inflationary pressures play out. I think we're going to see that probably persist for quite some time, and I think that's going to have an impact on social issues in particular. If you see inflationary pressure in terms of food and so on, lower disposable income in the context of high levels of inequality and low wage rates, high unemployment, then you see a rising populism, rising nationalism, and then you see a kind of breakdown in kind of elements of global order, frankly, and we've seen that with the United States and Britain and elsewhere. So, and I think we are in a pretty fragile state in this country. So I think those social issues are going to become really visible globally over the short term. On the environmental side, sure, we all get climate change. That's the kind of charismatic species, but biodiversity is actually more real and more immediate. And habitat loss and the impact that has, the loss of species, how that has, plays out on that whole kind of structure that we put forward earlier. And then, of course, there's issues around digital disruption and how that's going to play out. There's a great trends analysis done by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. But what's interesting, it came out in 2000, and they had like 10 kind of potential unforeseen disruptors. And one was conflict, and the other was food insecurity. And this came out, and who would have thought there'd be a war in Europe a few months later. And that war, goodness knows how that plays out. But in terms of what that's for food security, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we are in really interesting times. And for companies not to see these issues as strategic and to recognize that, some of them, it's blind, willful ignorance sometimes. It's avoiding some really inconvenient truths. But that's my 5 cents. I don't know, Nicola, if you want to throw something in on that.
Just two things. And the first one, I agree with you, John. The other one is really what's kind of often been referred to as a meta crisis, in the sense that we have this crisis of meaning. We are really starting to struggle. And I think one of the reasons where it's getting pushed into this is because there are so many things at the same time. And if you take a step back from that and you look and you see the extent to which these changes are coming so thick and fast, as Ronelle said, we're seeing the breakdown of paradigms, this realization that the way we looked at things before is no longer sufficient, is no longer fit for purpose. And in the breakdown, and there is going to be breakdown, and there will be pain in that breakdown, but in that, there is a huge window of opportunity. And I do believe, and it's partly why we're in this space, is I do believe that sustainability practitioners and sustainability practice done in a sufficiently informed way has a huge role to play in helping organizations grasp and respond intelligently and potentially at scale to those opportunities. So I agree with John, very interesting space, but huge opportunity if we can get it right and not get sort of sidelined by either the latest fad or, something else that our investors think are more important.
Okay, guys, we're running out of time, thick and fast. I wonder, Jonathan, if you can kind of in 1 minute answer Jeff's question. Please advise how you would guide NPOs and just wrap it up for us. Over to you.
I think we can take that question offline on NPOs. We have done some work with NPOs. I'm happy for us to take that offline because we only have 1 minute left. I mean, I think if that's fine with you, Jeff, and you can engage with us, and we'll do that. I think, I guess, closing, I would just highlight some of the challenges that we face. Highlight the really exciting opportunities to reframe this discussion that you have in your organizations, and when you've done that. You get a different level of engagement when people are understanding this ESG is about innovation. It's about more strategic repositioning. Once you've done that, then you've got your colleagues on board with you. So that's really an area to focus on. So I'll just leave with that kind of thought that organizations can have. Nicola, do you want to add a closing thought, or I think we're probably out of time?
Well, my 2 cents is, and I think we need to focus on practitioners, and I think we need to be healthy. I think we need to be strong. I think we need to deepen our focus on ourselves as well, because I think we play an incredibly important role. So yeah, just thanks for popping that up. But we really do need to regroup in some respect, to stop being overwhelmed by the small picture, but realize we still have to do that and find the resources and capabilities to do that, but not let that get in the way of the big fundamentals that both are opportunities for our organizations to address them at scale, but also the reason most of us got into the space in the first place, right? It's because we're passionate, and passionate people burn out. If we are constantly having to fight battles that are not feeling congruent with what we know the fundamentals are about. So yeah, let's see the big picture, and let's also focus on ourselves.
Thanks so much. It was lovely having you, Nicola and Jonathan. Please touch base with them. They are extremely knowledgeable, and the way that they handle strategy sessions where they actually help companies to find that magic, you know, and then get onto the wave of creating the wave. So our next in conversation with FluidRock is 1 September on insurance governance. You know, very important. It came out of the riots. Suddenly all audit committees had a meeting about what's our insurance, is it covered, and it links into all of this that we're talking about. And then on 6 October, we're talking about governance in the metaverse, you know, which is going to be an interesting one. And it was lovely having you. If you want to touch base with us on any question, we'll touch base with Jeff. We'll send out the documents requested, and it'll be interesting to get that Harvard Business Review. Thanks so much, everyone. It's the end for today.
Thanks. Bye-bye.